Can you hear me loud and clear? Shaino, Ahmed, Oliver?
Yeah,
Yes.
sounds good.
Yes, Salim.
Good
Great,
afternoon,
lovely.
everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to everyone who has been a part of DigiBank Summit. And with the sad heart, we come to the close of the event, but I have a very, very good panel discussion that is in place for all. Now, the next panel discussion is going to be moderated by Mr. Salim Ahmed, Senior Vice President, Technology, Head of Information Technology. Mr. Salim has over 25 years of experience in information technology with deep financial domain expertise and has worked earlier with Samba Financial Group in Saudi Arabia for 17 years and recently with First Abu Dhabi Bank in Abu Dhabi for close to 5 years and has been instrumental in bringing to fruition several global award-winning initiatives in these organizations. And I welcome Mr. Salim, who's going to be moderating this panel discussion. Salim, welcome on board with us. And I hope you have a very good session.
Thank you so much, Mitsu, for the wonderful introduction. I'm very privileged and honored to be in the part of the Khalij Times DigiBank Forum. And the session about neobanks emerging as the customer hot favorites is a great topic for discussion. And it's apt that it's a final part of this session of your forum. So before we start, maybe I'll give a quick introduction to the great panelists we have here. We have Mr. Ahmed Al-Rifai, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Arab Bank for Investment and Foreign Trade. Welcome, Mr. Ahmed. We have Mr. Shaino Thomas Philip, Senior Vice President, Head of PMO Transformation Group of the National Bank of Oman. We have Mr. Oliver Obatayo, and that's an interesting participation from a Chief Sales Officer from ID Now. I have a lot of questions to you, Oliver.
That's good.
And we have Mr. Vimal, who's the Chief Information Security Officer of the Bank of Sharjah. So wonderful. Welcome to the panel, gentlemen. And I'd like to start off, if Mitsu can share slides.
I have given you the right to share, Mr. Salim. You can do that from your end too, no problem at all.
Okay, 1 minute.
Or is it something that you want me to do from my end? Please let me know. I can do that.
No, I can share it. Just a minute. Yeah. Can you see the screen, gentlemen?
Yes, yes, Salim.
Okay, I just want to talk a little about to set the tone of the conversation, gentlemen. I know we have a limited time. There will be many participants in the panel, and we'll also invite questions. Just to give you a quick brief about the audience, especially the audience who are listening in, exactly what are neobanks exactly, right? There's a lot of dichotomy of understanding about our neobanks, fintechs. What are they? So I just want to set the context. Neobanks are digital-only banks, in contrast to fintechs, who are actually software companies serving financial services. There are many neobanks all over the world and well-known examples, and many of us know Kakio Bank, more than 10 million customers, Monzo, N26, and Cash Plus. And I was reading a recent Gartner report. There are 42 banks across the world as per the September 2020 report, which is an interesting statistic. And we also see that retail and banking deposits and payments appear to be the main focus of such neobanks, and credit products are, however, getting a lot of ground. I would also give you a picture here. This is an interesting picture which shows that the spread of neobanks, the size of the boxes indicate the plethora of neobanks in that particular geography. If you notice that Europe is leading the way here, followed by Asia and Australia, and by North America and South America. So this is a nice source from Gartner, which I had wanted to share in this audience to see that it is not a new phenomenon. There is an onslaught coming, so we all have to be ready for that. We will talk about certain key points in this discussion. So I'll start off the discussion by maybe asking each panelist to share their couple of thoughts on. I'll ask the question. I can actually now remove the share of the screen. These are the areas we'll be talking about. First question to all the audience, maybe Ahmed can start off by. My question is, neobanks are indeed making inroads into the banking space, right? There are 42 banks across the world, neobanks operating. Do you really seriously think that neobanks can make a dent into the space occupied by traditional banks? Do you really think so? I'd like each and every participant to maybe spend a couple of minutes on your thoughts, gentlemen.
Yeah, Salim, thank you. It's a very interesting question, and maybe most of us are wondering what technology will lead us to. Now, when we look at banking sector, we have to look at two different types, corporate and retail. And each sector also it have different segments. So yes, the new banks is a threat for the banks, but what I can see, especially in UAE, most of the bank already adopting this technology, enhancing their digital platforms, enhancing their digital onboarding for retail and consumer specifically. But I believe, the leader who will have end-to-end and let's call it multi-product providers, not only for the consumer, also if they start digitizing the corporate requirement. The banking sector from long time was leading in technology. Nevertheless, lately we can see even the governmental sector have speed up their adoption to digitization, their adoption to transformation. I believe this pandemic, COVID-19, especially have accelerated the banking sector or the financial sector in general to think differently, to think into the technology and the digitization platform. And I believe there will be a lot of cooperation between fintechs and banks and digital banks. This is happening and it's a fact. And I believe 2021 will show a lot of this development.
Wonderful, Ahmad. Great views on that. Summarizing your view is that a provider who can provide a full gamut of the consumer segments would be successful, and the banks are really moving towards competing with them. Great views, Mr. Ahmad. I'd like to hear Mr. Shaino. Please, your views, please, on this.
Yes, Salim. So this is an interesting question. In terms of neobanks, I think is more relevant in terms of this digital era, wherein more and more consumers are looking for better customer experience and to have their transaction cost very minimized and do it themselves within a fraction of a second. With this sort of mindset, with the new generation the customer has, I think neobanks certainly has a place and a place to play in terms of the consumer demands. Like let it be in terms of a transaction they want to do, a transfer they have to do, or in terms of a bill payment they have to do, and the ease and the experience at which customers are given by these neobanks is amazing. So definitely they have in my view, they have a space to play. They have a relevance in this era. Why that relevance is, in traditional banks has a structure in which they operate, and this structure in which they operate itself is bringing a lot of element of cost to the structure, because there is a branch, there is a back office. So many of these neobanks get set up. They have fully set up with very lean model, fully straight through processes, fully technologies which is latest and cloud oriented technologies. So the way which they can offer services to customers is much more cost effective, faster, and in an agile way. So wonderful. If you look at it, in these neobanks are focused on two areas, like either on in terms of opening a bank account and fulfilling the transaction need of the customer. But they are still yet to penetrate into the area of lending side. Yes, there are banks, but to complex lending, they are still a way to go. And also in terms of saving money, they are again a way to go from this journey. But in terms of financial insights and payments, yes, they have really played a role, and I think we cannot write them off.
Understood. Thank you, Shaino. Great comment, Shaino. Wonderful. You're saying that the neobanks are here to stay, and and they have a place to play in the market. Wonderful comment, Shaino. Mr. Oliver, it would be interesting to see from the other side of the fence. What do you think about this phenomenon?
Yeah, thanks for that, Salim. even seeing numbers like 42 neobanks globally, I think that's probably very much on the low side, as you also have an adjacent kind of ecosystem of other players in the market who are not even banks, but they still behave as banks, and they're offering banking solutions, even lending and mortgages. So we're probably looking at much more of players in the market actually really trying to dent, as you say, at the traditional banks. But maybe taking a step back for 1.5 minutes, it's even much more easier. This is your bank, done, right? And this is what we have called a trend consumeration. People want to consume every kind of product, whatever it is, in a way like they conduct their private life. If your private life is on the phone, you want to do your banking there as well. And this is one of the reasons why you have neobanks, besides, of course, costs and all those kind of things traditional banks are pressured with. But in the moment, neobanks they're kind of building on their front end expertise. They want to be cool, they want to be unique, they want to have a best user experience. And what usually comes with it, they have some kind of cool credit cards or banking cards, which traditional banks are much more, as you say, traditional, right? But while they look so shiny, that also brings a lot of pressure, because we will see probably also in the rest of the conversation, it is still not good enough because the consumer is spoiled. So you still need to behave as a professional bank. You still need to be able to integrate also your front end shiny processes with professional back end processes. Otherwise, you just go through the door and you fall off the cliffs because there's no real bank behind that. So I think we will see a lot of, while the number of neobanks will go up, we will see in the next 3 to 5 years a strong also consolidation of neobanks, because many will just not make it. A cool card is not good enough. You also need to be a good and a very successful bank. And maybe I leave you with a question. If everybody thinks about what was your first bank or banking account, I'll bet you a big dinner I'll pay for, it was not a neobank. It probably was a bank of your parents, which was a traditional bank.
Thank you, Oliver. Interesting views on that. I'm happy to see that you crossed the fence. You feel that this is going to be an onslaught in the coming future, which is good for the consumer, right? The bank is in your pocket, right? And it's an interesting conversation. I have a corollary question down the road, but wait for that. Let us hear Vimal. What is his views from on this particular question about neobanks making a dent in the traditional bank ecosystem?
Thanks, Salim. See, definitely, if you see a recent survey, there is a survey says that 73% of global banking customers have moved to digitized banking channels. So the way how the digital transformation is picking up in banking segment, as well as the ease of using banking channels, definitely neobanks are attracting the particular segment of people, because see, it has certain restriction as well. You see the way they offer products, the products are pretty much restricted as of now. Definitely in future they will expand, but as of now you can't compare the products of Neo with the conventional banks offering. But definitely they are expanding the product offerings now. So what I see as a security professional is definitely neobanks are not at all the way how the conventional banks securing their banking operations through multiple layers of security control. For example, if we see the recent news, there was a neobank called Dave Bank in US, as well Judo Capital in Australia. They got hacked because most of these neobanks are app driven. So for them, the security means the security that needs to be provided for the application. So they only think on the application security. So, but again, the end-to-end banking transaction need to look into network security and server level security and all other security aspects, which is kind of lacking from the neo-banking segment. This is how I see it. Also, the more fintech relationships that are getting into neobank segment, the complexity of technologies involved is also getting multiplied. So this will also bring a new breed of cyber risk for neobanks. So they need to work on identifying effective security practices which will help them to address those new breed of risks that will get triggered through fintech integration. Because I believe most of these new neobanks are getting integrated with a lot of fintech partners. So definitely a lot of complexities involved in the technologies that are associated for API integration and other kind of integration with the neobank. So because the data flows through all these interfaces, there are a lot of chances for data leakages through these interfaces. So definitely they have to build up the security stack, and also the way how I see the security governance is built in neobanks is they are not at par with the conventional banks. Conventional banks will have a dedicated security team. There will be formal security governance side out, security leadership. But here, as of now, these neobanks are pretty much driven through apps. So the focus is more only on application security, but it needs to be beefed up to much higher level. So, but definitely, I'm quite sure that the neobank segment is getting expanded. I'm quite sure that those who are getting into the neobanking space will definitely pay more focus in extending the security controls around, so that definitely it will become equal competitive for conventional banking in the near future. This is how I see it.
Thank you, Vimal. And for great thoughts on it. He also, touched upon the cyber security aspects of it, and great thoughts about, yes, these banks, the so-called neobanks, may have a brittle infrastructure or security governance around it, but things may mature as we go along. But that actually now ties up nicely with our next question to the panelists, and maybe I'll ask specific people here. The concern of Vimal is very real. But do you think, gentlemen, let's take this next generation. We have all grown up kids, right? I have a 21-year-old. I'm sure you also have long kids. These so-called millennials or the Gen X guys and the children of today. Do they really care if it's a brick and mortar building and having security governance, having lovely advertisements and big balance sheets? Do they really care? And what will drive them to go and reach out and open an account in a minute? Do they really care about security concerns? Don't you think that we will see a deluge of the next gen folks, reaching out to such people? One is the Gen X folks. Second is the disenfranchised and the unbanked population. Today, a person entering a branch, for him to open an account, he has to fill up a plethora of forms, KYC, credit score, etc. Now, here comes an app which tells me just enter your Emirates ID or whatever national ID, your account is open in seconds. You can start banking. In fact, I did that for my homemade last month. I opened an account for her in 5 minutes, and she got a card in the next day. So, what is your view on this? Do you really think that how can banks actually confront this head on? Your views. I'll ask Mr. Ahmed. He's the Chief Operating Officer. I'm sure that he can bring some operational context about the operating models to face off such an onslaught.
Thank you, Salim. Very interesting. I will take it from the security perspective and from the sale perspective. It's all driven by the regulatory in what country you are. If the regulatory is putting very clear processes like that, then you can build your platform in the right way. Now, when we go to the new generation and whether they will go to open an account fast or not, if you notice with the new generation, they are spenders more than they are saving money. And honestly, I can see that most of them, they want to have a wallet rather than an account. But when you go for the mid-age, the next age, let's say the people who's working and trying to build or settle down or whatever, those, they have a lot of demand from any financial institution, whether it is digitized financial institution or a traditional bank. Here, where we can see the shift, where it happened for consumer, I'm not talking about corporate, and I will never forget to mention corporate, because the value of corporate in the traditional bank is huge. The volume of consumer is huger.
Yeah.
So when you look at those consumer and how they are, the life is shifted through technology and multi-digital channels for them, you will find that if the new bank or the traditional bank understand their need correctly and whether they make it digitally or through the branch, they will attract the customer.
Yep.
Now, as long as I need an account to transfer my salary or a wallet to go to a POS and pay or something, yeah, it's easy. But when it's come to my personal need, mortgage, car, saving scheme, investment, portfolio management, high net worth, as long as you go up with the segment, you will find the demand change from the customer himself. And specifically, when you have money, you want to have insurance on your money, especially if you are a high net worth. Definitely, you want to have a trust on where you will put your money and accessibility. So I think regulatory will play a very, very big part in it, which will drive the digitization and the transform to new bank.
In fact, Mr. Ahmed, you rightly said that in fact, the research by Gartner also indicates exactly what you said. The neobanks today are focused on actually deposits more. As you said, use of the wallet kind of operation. Payments are entering into the picture like remittances, etc., to the blue collar workers. But as you said, as we go up the pyramid, the trust factor has sort of increases. We talk about trust advisory, financial advisory. It's a different ball game altogether, which traditional banks are currently better off. I'll ask a question to Shino, which is slightly a corollary to what Mr. Ahmed was mentioned, handling the PMO and all, Mr. Shino. How would you operationalize a banking operating model to handle projects of this nature, digital projects, doing a new functionality? What would be your suggested operating model to face off these neobanks? Because these neobanks have all agile way, right? They have DevOps. They talk about Azure. They go and open an account in Azure, one-click deployment, production, DR, everything is provisioned. Traditional banks are not like that. We have approval cycles. We have steering committees. We have paralysis by analysis. It's how do you feel that we should operate ourselves or regroup ourselves?
Right. Yes, Salim. So in this context, the operating model plays a huge role for traditional banks to also become somewhat similar to the neobanks in their offerings. Yes, it's an opportunity also for the traditional banks. If you look at the perspective, they have a customer trust. They have the ability to empathize to a customer because I can see him face to face, and a customer who is dissatisfied can be empathized with my own human touch with him, and our ability to give him different segments, the different products is vast. But what is lacking was a traditional way of delivering products to the market, which takes a long time in the cycle, and with a lot of approval cycles. Plus, you are envisaging a bigger product and you try to create the full product, and your delivery will be at 8 to 10 months or a 10 to 12 month cycle. Yes. So now already the banks have thought about it, and I am sure majority of the bank has moved into an agile model of a culture within the organization in their operating model itself, wherein they also see, rather than having a full product is done, what is the minimum viable product or minimum value proposition I can go to market and test it and continuously learn the feedback from the customer, and then recycle this on a much more agile way. So here again, I think a lot of work has been done by the traditional bank system to educate in terms of their management to the mid senior levels, to the mid levels, to say how the new way of working should, or the culture should change in the bank. So in that perspective, the operating model itself is changed, that the barriers between very specific risk group, operational groups has been moved out in terms of specific initiatives, and created agile culture, and then showcase to the people also within the bank itself as a cultural change, to see, yes, there is a different way we can do some of the initiatives so that you can get the customer feedback upfront, and then you go through an iterative cycle to see what changes can be done, and which will reduce the cost, which will reduce the wastage of putting a lot of energy upfront, and then you learn from the cycle in which the product is launched the market, then you continuously revive it. So the operating model in terms of customer experience, in terms of the technology delivery, in terms of how do you circumvent the legacy architecture, in terms of accelerating the go-to-market, in terms of the governance, in terms of the new skill set required, because now many of these initiatives required the operating model requires to have new skill set embarked and embedded to deliver
I know
quickly and faster.
wonderful thoughts. I know you've thought about that banks have to innovate their processes, bring in agile, educate the seniors, upskill themselves, the new technologies like DevOps and cloud. Wonderful points. Or else we will not survive, right? The old way of the waterfall.
Absolutely. We will not be able to survive and compete with neobanks. So here again, like we mentioned, the banks has an equal opportunity similar to the neobanks to have both the cake to be eaten, like on site, entice the new generations through digital areas. At the same time, the other segments to be provided with much more value propositions which have their trust and ability to converse them directly.
Wonderful. I'll have maybe one more question. I'll ask Oliver first, and maybe Vimal can comment after that. And Oliver, knowing that you're from ID Now, I've gone through your website. Interesting proposition you guys have about identification, etc. And if as we all know, the financial inclusion paradigm requires a digital identification, as they call it, the foundational identity and the identity of a national to participate in the banking process, and it's a key process in the KYC. Now, what do you think the neobanks will have the challenges, to conduct this kind of a trusted authentication and authorization, especially with government services and trusted data? How do you think that this particular area would develop? Because neobanks either have a space in there or they don't have a space. Some of them are mandated by the government. Case in point, the UAE pass in the UAE government. So can you throw some light on this aspect? And maybe Vimal can also touch upon that, considering it's part of the information security domain.
Yeah, so in general, as we discussed before, for neobanks, the front end and so to speak, also the onboarding process is one of the key processes they need to do very well, and they do that actually very well, right? So all they need to do is to basically select the right partners, as many of those neobanks. I mean, we're working since nearly 10 years with neobanks in Germany and Europe, where they already have moved to kind of the second wave of being a neobank, not so neo anymore, actually. So they become very good in offering remote, mobile, and electronic KYC solutions, as we offer as an example. But it shouldn't be about ID Now. It's more about the generic problem. So at the end of the day, if you offer a really agile onboarding process, you want to make sure that getting through the door, the customer has a very seamless and digital real-time experience. So as an example, using one of those mechanisms, and you described it for your kid, if you electronically check the document, you can do it yourself on your phone. You just compare the document, like the Emirates ID card as an example, with your face, and you do security checks. It's about a 60-second process, and then you're done. You through the door, and your bank account can be opened, assuming that the back-end systems are also integrated well into the front-end shiny door. So I think this is a key process for the neobanks. Now, the challenge for the neobanks is, as every other bank has as well, so when neobanks basically come out of their honeymoon period, then the seriousness of life starts, and this is the same for neobanks. You need to comply to regulation, so you need to be educated about regulation, or you have the right partners who are educated about regulation. You need to have it integrated technically well in your processes. You need to make sure that you use a partner who has the best technology, just some name dropping of artificial intelligence, machine learning, all those kind of things to make sure that you're testing algorithms. They really make sure that the right people get through the door, right? It's like a nightclub. If you have not good people at the door who make sure that the right people get in there, or enough or too many, then your business is not working, because then you have nobody to do business with. And these people at the door, that's basically ID Now, to doing those checks in a compliant way, in a secure way, because ultimately identity theft is one of the biggest problems society has in the moment. And that costs banks, irrespectively of neo or retro or whatever, that costs them most of reputation and also money costs is identity theft, right? And anti-money laundering and all those kind of things. So also neobank is captured in that traditional, I would say, framework to a certain extent. So it's even more important for them to be very professional in those processes, but still be able to offer that in a way that the end user really has I would say, special neo kind of user experience, because all those things happen in the background. I think that's going to be the needle mover. If you can look, if you can look so simple and easy, but still have the quality of security checks like a traditional experienced bank of 150 years of history, then you have high chances of really also staying in the business. And as we see in Germany, many of the neobanks are already going out of business, because ultimately it's not just a shiny front door. You also need to be able to make business, and for that you need the right entry mechanism.
Yeah, you have said views, excellent views. You're right, and also it ties in with what Shino mentioned about the backend processes being seamless in APIs or whatever. STP is the buzzword, and it's also important not to just follow the buzzwords of AI and ML and actually do it with proper use cases, right? Some people just follow the buzzwords, but it's important to leverage these technologies to give an overall seamless experience. Point well taken, well noted, Mr. Oliver. I'd like Vimal to add a little about that on this particular aspect of digital onboarding, so to speak.
Yeah, as Oliver told, it's very clear that the honeymoon period of neobanks, it has come to a kind of dead end because of the recent incidents happened in Australia and US. As Oliver actually told, digital identity theft, which has become a very critical security hole for these new generation banks, which are neobanks. So I would like to share the experience that we are having, and we are actually exploring few of the technical solutions that help us to look into identity theft, which is happening through attack vectors such as SIM swap, which is recently observed in UAE market. There is a new attack vector called SIM swap, like using the mobile number of customers provided with the bank. There are some scams happening. So there are solutions such as digital identity proofing as well risk-based authentication solutions. So for every potential customer, based on his credit score as well, the personal background check done for those customers, there is a risk profile need to be created, and based on the risk profile, the authentication will be happening. So these risk-based authentication solutions are seen as one of the viable options for addressing digital identity theft, as well wherever it's really sensible. Organization need to think about bringing in multi-factor authentication solutions, so that it ensures that even a layer of security fails, the other layers will come to rescue. So,
excellent.
And definitely, this is how I see neobanks should look into the way how the identity theft scams can be prevented.
Excellent, Vimal. Great point, both of you, Oliver and Vimal. We have been talking in this forum. It's been excellent discussion and a very enriching discussion. We've been talking about the man on the road, right? These are the retail customers, right? You and me and our kids and our family. Let us take a minute to ask Mr. Ahmed here. Is there an opportunity for a neobank to cater for the SMEs and the small businesses? You know, I mean, therein lies a huge opportunity. I know the digital onboarding process, and ID Now, Oliver from ID Now would also see that as a potential market. And what are your views on that, Ahmed? If you are from the Arab Bank for Investment and Foreign Trade, if there was a new bank catering for that kind of a segment, would you embrace that?
Definitely. Actually, I like what Oliver and my colleagues say related to the security and identification of the client and customer. And same thing, I'll drive it from there. Same thing when we go to SME or corporate. Now, when we talk about SME or corporate, business is not as easy as consumer. Consumer, you have certain parameters, you have to put them in the system, certain credit policies, certain nationality risk or whatever, and you can put them in the system. But when it comes to SME and to corporate, each SME and each corporate is different. So I believe, and I am sure actually, same way the fintech disrupt the payment sector, disrupt the onboarding, there will be some solution coming for the SME. Maybe not as fast as we see directly with the facility lending and like that, but I believe the onboarding itself, the updating the portfolio from trade license, from board resolution like that, because also the governments, most of the governments around the world, they start digitizing this aspect, because of the pandemic, because of COVID-19 and so on. So yes, I think the fintech and some banks also, which they have their own development or in a partnership with a vendor, they will start looking at the SME and the corporate sector. Now, it is, as I say, it's complex, but it is a reduction of cost. It is speed to the market. We can see there's a lot of solution now already in the market, which making you as a corporate or as an SME can track your payment, can know what is your chain supply, can know what is your trade finance business and where to get the quotation, the pricing. And I believe in UAE specifically, let me go back to UAE, the government is also working hard with the banks, such as the custom department, to have a one platform. So all this is an indication that yes, there will be new banks for SME and hopefully in the future for corporates.
You and me are in this country, UAE, and a lot of initiatives by the government in terms of trade, in terms of using blockchain, in terms of facilitating that access. In fact, there's a new technology which is coming up using satellite technology to track the movement of goods. It's going to be huge. Would Oliver like to comment on this, coming from an organization which does identification per se? How would you view this space?
Yeah, you've been reading my mind, Salima. Yes, so as an example, in Germany and in Europe, we already have 10 to 20 customers ourselves who are more in the SME space, because one thing traditional banks are not doing very well, they're not catering for the smaller companies like the mama papa shops, the 1 to 3 people companies where you need quick access to your banking facilities in order to conduct business. It takes weeks and weeks. So we have also products, as we call them, BKYC, so business KYC, where you do all those more complex KYC checks and security checks and background checks through databases with partners ourselves here in Germany, as an example. And there are some very interesting neobanks and fintechs who cater very specifically to the needs of, let's say, small businesses, right? And this already is existing since a couple of years. And I'm sure that, and we're also having conversations in the UAE, partially with the regulator, on how to make that happen there as well, because there's a very dynamic, I would say, startup scene also in the UAE and in Dubai. That's the reason why we are expanding into that region, which are in the needs of that. And the way you always do it in the Middle East, and this is why I love it so much besides the food, is really you watch a little bit what's happening in the world, you cherry pick, but then you're so agile and flexible also from your regulatory perspective, that you put a framework into place where you can accelerate and leapfrog actually technologies and development steps. So you don't go step by step, slowly like Europe does. You go, boom, here you go, right? And then you go full throttle. And this is our style. So that's why we're here, right? And we're here to stay.
You're absolutely right, Oliver. In fact, I'm glad that the SME is also flourishing in that aspect in Europe. And you're absolutely right. The UAE is simply awesome in that. You've noticed that 2 digital banks have been given the licenses to operate in the UAE. So it's going to be a revolution here. We cherry pick, but we execute fast, right?
Yeah.
We will others dream, but we execute faster than them. And the story here.
Sorry, Germany.
I'll just ask all the panelists, well, final thoughts, 20 seconds each, please. Your thoughts about what you think a top 3 in your mind a traditional bank should do to meet the challenge of a neobank in the country. Top 3, 20 seconds each. Mr. Ahmed, you can start, because we're already running out of time.
Yeah, very fast. Top 3. First one, be innovative. Don't copy paste what you see in the market and do it. Number 2, don't forget regulatory. This is the safe for you. And the number 3, which is the most important thing, what customer need, whether it's a corporate or an individual or a high net worth, what they really need.
Wonderful, wonderful. Awesome, Mr. Ahmed. Mr. Shaino, your
Yeah.
3 top.
Yes, in my view, the 3 top things, I think traditional banks look at their customer experience, how they can better it, their operating model to be aligned to this. And finally, last is continuously improve on the products and services. They continuously
Excellent.
improve.
Wonderful, Shaino. Mr. Vimal, your top 3.
Security governance, compliance with the local regulations, then periodic reviews of the applications from security point of view. These are the 3 top areas.
Excellent, excellent, gentlemen. I think, Mitsu, we have run out of your time, actually. And I would like to thank the panelists here. It's been great. We are in the WhatsApp group. I'd like to extend our relationship further. I think we'll catch up, Mr. Ahmed especially, and Mr. Oliver, Shaino, and Mr. Vimal. Let's catch up offline. And I'd really thank you all for your time, for your in this August panel. And thank you, Mr. Mitsu from College Times, for organizing this panel discussion. And would you like to say something, Mitsu?
Thank you, everyone. It was a very good panel discussion with a lot of interesting and pointers. So thank you for such an interesting session. Now, all good things come to an end, and this panel discussion is a fabulous close to the UAE edition of DigiBank Summit organized by College Times. As per research dive, the global digital banking market size was valued at 803.8 billion in 2018 and is anticipated to reach a massive 1,610 billion by 2027, growing a CAGR of 8.9% during the forecast period. So it's a perfect time to be in the industry. College Times has not only witnessed the rise of banking sector in the region, but also witnessed its contribution in nation building and helping the GCC countries become the economic powerhouses they are today. We've made an effort to bring the best of UAE banking experts and UAE banking leaders by presenting DigiBank in a virtual environment, staying true to our commitment of keeping the safety regulations of our audience in mind. We have the DigiBank KSA edition on the 25th, that is day after tomorrow, the same event with a special focus on the massive Saudi market. The link and the password remain the same. I request all the attendees and the speakers to kindly attend the event. Last, but definitely not the least, I would like to thank all our speakers, all our sponsors, the strategic sponsor, Nutanix, Associate Technology Partner, SAP Concur, Silver Sponsor, OneSpan, Banking Technology, Banking Transformation Partner, Finastra, Customer Experience Partner, Avaya, Payment Innovation Partner, MasterCard, Associate Partner, ID Now, Networking Sponsor, Lenovo, and Networking Partner, MDSAP, for showing massive trust in our capabilities and making this event possible. So thank you all the speakers for being a part of the event. Thank you all the panelists. This was definitely a beautiful end to the UAE edition. And I hope to see you all for the KSA edition. Thank you very much from College Times.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.